Welcome to At Vowsburn, where stories of love, betrayal, and redemption unfold. They thought Rosemary had forgotten her own 50th anniversary. But what she revealed that night left everyone speechless. I've always believed that love is measured not by the grand gestures, but by the small things, a hand held during hard times, a knowing glance across the dinner table, the quiet comfort of being seen. For 50 years, I held on to that belief like a pearl in my palm, polishing it with patience and forgiveness. My name is Rosemary Clarke, and I was married to Edward for half a century. 50 years of shared breakfasts, late-night laughter, and, in recent years, a silence that had grown so heavy it nearly swallowed me whole. When you've been married that long, people assume you've seen everything together, the highs, the lows, the arguments that end with a sigh and a smile. But what they don't tell you is how lonely love can become when one person stops showing up for it. Edward had changed after he retired. The man who once brought me coffee in bed and called me his rose began spending more time at the country club than at home. Our dinners turned into quick microwaved meals, eaten separately. I told myself it was just a phase, that old age made people quieter, more distant. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. Still, I clung to hope. Our 50th wedding anniversary was coming up, and I imagined we'd do something special, maybe dinner at the seaside restaurant where he proposed, or a quiet night in with family and old photos. I even pulled out my wedding dress from the attic a month before, smiling as I brushed away the dust. It didn't fit, of course, but it still shimmered with memories. Then came the first sign that something was off. 2 weeks before the anniversary, I overheard Edward on the phone with our daughter Melissa. He was in his study, the door cracked open. Yes, Saturday works. Are the reservations under your name? Perfect, he said, his tone low and hurried. And please, don't mention it to your mother. You know how she gets with surprises. My heart fluttered, a surprise. For me? After all these years, maybe he was planning something sweet after all. I almost giggled like a young girl, pressing my hand over my mouth so he wouldn't hear. But the days that followed were odd. Melissa avoided my calls, and Edward seemed more distracted than usual. One afternoon, I caught him folding a navy suit and setting it aside with his best cufflinks. What's the occasion? I asked. Oh, just a club dinner, he replied without meeting my eyes. The same night as our anniversary? He hesitated. Oh, right. We'll do something another day, Rose. You know how these things are. Another day. That phrase felt like a dagger wrapped in silk. Another day, another excuse, another moment of my life brushed aside. I tried not to show my disappointment. I told myself he must be planning something, that maybe Melissa was in on it, that maybe, for once, I was wrong to worry. But the ache in my chest told me I wasn't. The morning of our anniversary, I woke early. The house was quiet, sunlight filtering through the curtains. I went downstairs, humming softly, expecting at least a card or a note. Nothing. The table was empty except for a cup of cold coffee Edward had left behind. By noon, he was gone. I checked the garage, his car wasn't there. I called his phone twice, but it went straight to voicemail. A sinking feeling filled me. I tried calling Melissa next, but she didn't pick up either. That's when my neighbor Helen stopped by. She's been my friend for 20 years, a sharp-tongued widow who notices everything. Morning, Rosie, she said, holding a basket of muffins. Then, noticing my face, oh, honey, what's wrong? Edward's gone. On our anniversary, I said, trying to sound calm. Her brow furrowed. Gone where? Some dinner. At the club, I think. Her lips tightened. You mean the dinner your daughter posted about on Facebook this morning? My heart froze. What? Helen nodded grimly, pulling out her phone. Here, look. There it was, clear as day. A photo of Edward, Melissa, and her husband Jason, smiling at a beautifully decorated banquet table. The caption read, "Celebrating Dad's retirement and new beginnings." Red heart. New beginnings. Not a word about me. Not one mention of 50 years of marriage. I felt the room spin. My hands trembled as I stared at the photo, my husband, my daughter, my son-in-law, all toasting to a future that apparently didn't include me. Helen put a hand on my shoulder. "You want me to go over there and wring his neck?" she asked half-jokingly. I gave a weak smile. "No. I'll handle it." And I meant it. Because in that moment, something inside me hardened, not in bitterness, but in clarity. I realized I'd spent years shrinking myself to keep the peace. Always forgiving, always quiet, always the good wife and mother. But 50 years of loyalty deserved better than a quiet kitchen and a forgotten anniversary. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and went up to the attic. I found my wedding album, the one with gold-trimmed pages and faded Polaroids. On the first page was a photo of Edward slipping the ring on my finger, his eyes full of promise. I traced his face with my fingertip and whispered, "You used to see me. What happened to that man?" Then, tucked behind one of the pages, I found something I hadn't seen in years, a letter from Edward, dated on our 25th anniversary. It read, "To my Rose. If I ever forget how lucky I am, remind me. If I ever drift away, pull me back. You are my anchor, my forever." I laughed bitterly through tears. He'd forgotten, all right. But I was done reminding. That's when the idea came to me, not revenge, exactly, but something close. A way to reclaim my dignity, to show them all that the woman they thought had faded into the background was very much still here. The next morning, I called a lawyer, an old friend of Edward's who owed me a favor. I asked him to prepare something special, something that would make sure no one could write me out of my own story. He hesitated. "Are you sure you want to do this, Rosemary?" I smiled, calm and certain. "Oh, I'm sure. It's time my family remembered who built the foundation they're standing on." I hung up and began to plan, not a confrontation, but a revelation. Because if Edward and Melissa wanted to celebrate new beginnings, then I would give them one they'd never forget. For the next few days, I moved through the house like a ghost. Edward barely noticed. He came home late, humming some tune from the country club, smelling faintly of whiskey and cologne that wasn't mine. He greeted me with a distracted "Evening, Rose," kissed the air near my cheek, and disappeared upstairs to his study. He didn't see the quiet fury behind my smile. He didn't notice the way my eyes had changed, sharper, colder. I wasn't the soft-hearted woman who waited by the window anymore. I was preparing for something. It wasn't revenge, not really. I wasn't going to scream or throw plates or beg for recognition. I wanted something quieter, more powerful. Something that would make them look at me, truly see me, one last time. My lawyer, Henry Wallace, came over that Thursday morning. He was a gray-haired man with kind eyes and an impeccable sense of discretion. "Rosemary," he said, taking off his hat as he stepped into my living room. I reviewed the documents. "You really want to transfer everything into a trust?" "Yes," I replied. "Everything that's legally mine. The house, the lake cabin, my savings account, all of it." "And you want Melissa and Edward to be?" I smiled faintly. Surprised. He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll make it happen." Once he left, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching the autumn leaves swirl across the yard. My wedding ring caught the light, that simple gold band Edward had placed on my finger 50 years ago. I twisted it slowly, remembering the words he'd said that day, "You'll never stand alone, Rose. Not as long as I live." But lately, I'd never felt more alone. Still, part of me wondered if I was being too harsh. Maybe he'd drifted away without realizing it. Maybe Melissa's coldness wasn't intentional. Families can lose sight of each other in the noise of life. But when I looked again at that Facebook post, "New Beginnings," I knew it wasn't a mistake. They had chosen to exclude me. so I made one too. The next week, I called Helen, my neighbor and closest friend. She was sitting in her kitchen when I arrived, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls filling the air. "You're sure you want to do this?" she asked, sliding me a mug. "Oh, I've never been surer of anything," I said, smiling. Helen grinned. "Then let's make it good." We spent the afternoon at her dining table, planning the details. Helen had always been a little dramatic. She once faked a sprained ankle to catch her cheating boyfriend off guard, so she had ideas. "You need to show up at that dinner looking like a queen," she said. "Not broken, not bitter, but radiant. The kind of woman no one can ignore." "I haven't felt radiant in years," I murmured. "You will," she promised. The night before the big dinner, I stood in front of my mirror for the first time in a long while and studied myself. My hair had gone silver, my skin carried the soft lines of time, but my eyes, they were still the same. The same eyes Edward had once fallen in love with. I pulled out a long, deep emerald dress I'd bought years ago and never worn. It shimmered under the lamplight. I paired it with my pearl necklace, the one Edward had given me on our 10th anniversary. For the first time in decades, I felt like myself again, the woman who still had dignity, grace, and quiet power. The next evening, I arrived at the country club alone. The parking lot was full, every car polished to a shine. Through the tall glass windows, I could see Edward and Melissa at a long banquet table, surrounded by family and friends. Laughter floated through the air, mingling with the clink of champagne glasses. A banner read, "Celebrating Edward Clarke's new chapter." My stomach turned, not from nerves, but from disbelief. My new chapter apparently didn't include me. As I entered the room, a hush rippled through the guests. Forks paused midair. Heads turned. Edward's smile froze when he saw me. Melissa's face drained of color. "Rosemary," Edward stammered, standing up. "What are you? How did you?" I lifted my chin. "Happy anniversary, dear." Gasps echoed around the room. Some guests looked at each other in confusion. A few shifted uncomfortably. "Mom," Melissa said quickly, forcing a smile. This isn't what you think." "We were just, oh, I know exactly what this is," I interrupted softly. "A celebration. Of 50 years of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. How lovely that you invited everyone, except your wife." Edward flushed red. "Rose, don't make a scene." I tilted my head. "I didn't." "You did that all by yourself." A few people coughed, trying to hide their awkwardness. Others looked at me with something like pity. I ignored them all. Then, calmly, I walked to the center of the room, set down my purse, and pulled out a small envelope, the one Henry had helped me prepare. "Since we're talking about new beginnings," I said, my voice steady, "I brought something to share. A letter from my lawyer." Edward's eyes widened. "Rosemary, what are you doing?" "Making sure my story isn't erased." I opened the envelope and began reading aloud, my voice carrying across the room. "This document certifies that all jointly owned assets under the Clarke estate have been transferred into a living trust under the sole direction of Mrs. Rosemary Clarke." A murmur spread through the crowd. Edward took a step forward. "You can't." "I can," I said, looking him dead in the eye. And I did. Melissa's mouth fell open. "Mom, why would you do this?" I turned to her. "Because when you decided your father's retirement was worth celebrating more than 50 years of marriage, you made a choice. And so did I." The room went silent except for the faint hum of the band that had stopped playing mid-song. I could see it, the disbelief, the shame, the dawning realization that I wasn't some fragile old woman waiting to be forgotten. I was the foundation. The matriarch. The one who had kept everything running while they planned their little new beginnings. Edward's voice cracked. "Rosemary, please. Let's talk about this privately." "Oh, we'll talk," I said, gathering my purse. But first, I'm going to enjoy my evening. After all, it's our anniversary, and I refuse to spend it invisible. Without waiting for his response, I turned to the stunned guests and smiled politely. Enjoy the champagne, everyone. It's already paid for, by me. Then I walked out. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp. The sound of laughter and whispers followed me out the door, but I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt light, untethered even. My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From freedom. When I got home, Helen was waiting on my porch, 2 glasses of wine in hand. Well, she asked, her eyes twinkling. It worked, I said, letting out a shaky breath. It really worked. Helen grinned. Good for you, Rosie. About damn time. We sat together on the porch, sipping wine under the stars. I could still feel the echo of that room, the gasps, the whispers, the stunned faces. But most of all, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, seen. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe Edward would come home angry. Maybe Melissa would call, or maybe she wouldn't. But none of that mattered now. Because for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't waiting to be loved. I was standing in my own power. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of mine. The morning after the dinner, I woke up to the sound of birds outside my window. For the first time in years, I didn't feel that heavy ache in my chest. The sun warmed my face, and for a moment, I just lay there, smiling to myself. Then, right on cue, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Edward, standing there in his rumpled suit from the night before. His tie was askew, and his eyes were bloodshot, a look I hadn't seen since the early years of our marriage, when he used to stay up late worrying about bills. Rosemary, he said quietly. Can I come in? I stepped aside without a word. He walked in slowly, like a man entering a church, every step heavy with shame. The silence between us stretched. Finally, I broke it. You should eat something, I said softly, motioning toward the kitchen. You look terrible. He gave a weak laugh. Still taking care of me, even now. I poured him coffee and sat across the table, my posture straight, my heart oddly calm. I didn't mean for any of that to happen, he began. Melissa thought the dinner would be about you, I finished for him. He sighed. Yes. But it wasn't supposed to be cruel. Yet it was, I said. He winced. You're right. I forgot what the date meant to you. To us. To us? I asked gently. Or to the version of us that existed a long time ago? He looked down at his hands. The gold band on his finger caught the light, the same way mine had the night before. I lost sight of what mattered, he said. After I retired, I didn't know who I was anymore. You seemed fine without me. And Melissa, she filled the space I didn't know how to fill. That's not an excuse, I said, my voice quiet but firm. You didn't forget the date, Edward. You forgot me. He flinched. For a moment, I almost softened. Almost. Then he said something I didn't expect. Rosemary. I saw Henry's papers. You transferred the accounts, the house, everything. Is this how it ends? I leaned back, folding my hands. No, Edward. This is how it changes. He frowned. I don't understand. You will, I said, sliding a small envelope across the table. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single letter, written in my careful cursive. I'd stayed up late the night before, writing every word from the heart. He began to read silently, his lips moving slightly. His hands trembled halfway through. When he finally looked up, his eyes were glassy. You're leaving me the house? I nodded. The house, yes. And the savings. But not the cabin. He blinked. The lake cabin? Why not? I smiled faintly. Because that's where I'll be. For a while, at least. He looked stunned. You're moving out? I'm taking a break, I said simply. I need time to remember who I am when I'm not your wife or Melissa's mother, just me. He swallowed hard. Rose, Don't, I said gently. You've had 50 years to talk. Now it's my turn to be quiet, to listen to myself. He covered his face with his hands, and for a moment, I saw the man I'd married, proud, lost, trying so hard to make sense of what had just happened. I felt sadness, yes. But I also felt peace. When he finally left, I stood by the window watching him go. He paused at the end of the walkway, turned, and looked back. I gave a small wave. He didn't wave back, but I could see it, the regret written all over his face. 2 weeks later, I packed my things and drove to the lake cabin. The road was lined with golden leaves, and the air smelled like rain and pine. It felt like driving back into my own past, back to the place where Edward had first told me he loved me, where we'd carved our initials into the old oak by the water. The cabin was small but warm. Dusty, yes, but still filled with echoes of laughter and long-ago summers. I opened the windows, let in the breeze, and stood by the water, watching the ripples catch the light. That first night, I lit a small fire, poured myself a glass of wine, and read through a stack of old letters Edward had written me when we were young. Some of them made me laugh, some made me cry. But all of them reminded me of the woman I had been, hopeful, brave, full of love. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet reflection, I realized the truth. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my own story. I didn't want to end things with bitterness. I wanted to live with grace. So the next morning, I called Melissa. She didn't answer the first time. Or the second. But finally, she picked up. Mom? Her voice was hesitant. Melissa, I said, keeping my tone even. I'm not angry anymore. Just disappointed. I know, she said, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for any of it to get so. I know you didn't, I interrupted softly. You were just thinking of him. But now it's time to think of me, too. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, quietly, can I come see you? I smiled. Not yet. But soon. Months passed. The snow came and went. The lake froze over, I thawed, a ND sparkled again in the spring sunlight. And slowly, I began to heal. I painted again, something I hadn't done in 30 years. I planted a small garden by the porch. I learned how to fix the creaky old door myself. I laughed more. Slept better. The loneliness I had feared turned out to be something else entirely, freedom. Then, one morning, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, there stood Edward, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, the kind I used to love. His hair was grayer, his eyes softer. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, he said. I wasn't sure either, I replied, though I stepped aside to let him in. He looked around the cabin, taking in the photos, the fresh paint, the warmth of the place. It's beautiful, he said quietly. It's mine, I answered simply. He nodded. I know. And I'm sorry for everything. I lost sight of us. Of you. For a moment, the years fell away. He wasn't the man who'd humiliated me or forgotten our anniversary. He was the young man I'd fallen for on that very lake, holding my hand under the stars. I smiled. Apology accepted. But forgiveness, that will take time. He nodded again, understanding. We sat by the fire, two old souls surrounded by memories, not speaking much, just being. And in that quiet, something shifted. Not love reborn, but respect rediscovered. Before he left, he turned to me and said, you know, everyone at that dinner still talks about you. About how strong you looked. I chuckled. Good. Maybe they'll finally remember who I am. That night, I stood by the lake again, the moonlight dancing on the water. I thought of the girl I used to be, the wife I became, and the woman I finally reclaimed. They thought I'd forget my 50th anniversary. But I didn't forget a thing. I remembered everything, who I was, what I'd given, and what I deserved. And in remembering, I found something far greater than revenge. I found myself. White heavy checkmark. End of story. This was Rosemary Clarke's story, a reminder that grace can be the strongest form of revenge. If this touched your heart, subscribe to Voiceover for more powerful tales of courage, love, and second chances.